Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. For today's video, we're going to jump right into it. We're going to be doing a 30-ounce screw top peekaboo, and we're going to be doing it a little bit different this time. I already sanded and prepped my cup off camera just to save me some time, but I went with Rust-Oleum 2x flat white primer and paint. And then I just had like a gold. I don't know what gold this was because the label kind of got messed up. It's an old can, so I don't know what gold, but you could just do any gold. And if I'm being honest, you could probably avoid some of the gold because we are going to be doing a peekaboo, so it kind of overlaps. Not overlaps, but it covers the gold. So I would maybe just do like half gold, half glow in the dark. And I did this with UV resin instead of epoxy because I wanted to do this quicker, because epoxy, it takes some time to cure. This particular project, there's not really like a clean way of doing it. It tends to get messy because of the glitter. But besides that, this is a peekaboo, so there's no particular way your glitter needs to be, as long as it's just more of the glow in the dark than the gold. Like I said, if I would have done this again, I probably would have avoided more of the gold, but it worked out in the end. For the glow in the dark glitter, I am using Casper by Lily Rose Craft Room, and that is my favorite glow in the dark glitter. I have actually used that for my nails as well, and the glow on it is very intense, and it's perfect for projects like this. And it's like between a fine cut to like a chunky cut. It's like a medium cut glitter, so it's not too fine and it's not too thick, so it's perfect for this. And you just want to follow the spray paint pattern, meaning like put the gold with the gold and then put the white or the glow in the dark glitter on top of the white. And for the bottom, I like to take my cup upside down and just press it down, because if you try to like tip it over, it kind of doesn't work out. At least not for me. I make a bigger mess and I get no glitter on the cup. And then you just want to cure this for 2 to 3 minutes depending on whatever resin and UV lamp you are using. Look at that glow. And the great thing about this is that it glows underneath the layers of epoxy as well. Now we're going to get ready for our first layer of epoxy. I believe I did 20 mLs of both part A and B, so a total of 40. This is a 30 ounce, so it is going to take up more epoxy than your regular cups. It doesn't look that big on camera, but holding it, it's a pretty hefty cup. I would recommend you do a heavy coat for your first layer, because since this is a glittered cup, the glitter tends to absorb most of the epoxy. So to avoid so many layers and all the sanding process, just try to do a heavy coat for the first layer. And if you need to do a second coat, you could always go ahead with the second coat. And then once that's done, I like to take my heat gun or my heat torch or whatever you have that provides heat to pop any micro bubbles. You're done with your first layer, you want to let it spin for 6 to 10 hours or 6 to 8 hours depending on your cure time of your epoxy and your temperature of your work area. The first layer of epoxy was done. I went straight in with a second layer because since we did use a lot of glitter, you can still feel like the pokey bits of it. And the bad thing is about that is if you sand straight on that, you can take away the shine of the glitter, like you will damage it. So just go straight into a second layer. And I believe I also did 20 mLs of both part A and B. Like I said, this is a hefty cup, so it took up a lot more epoxy than your regular 20 ounce. So I just went straight for the second layer and I did the same thing, popped the micro bubbles with my heat torch and let it spin for 6 to 8 hours. And then we're gonna move on to the next step. Quick tip I will say about the rounded bottoms of these tumblers when you're working with any glitter or epoxy, you want to try to flatten the glitter before you apply your layers, meaning you could take a piece of parchment paper and kind of pat it down just to flatten the glitter, because if you don't do that and you just go in straight with layers of epoxy, you will tend to see more pokey bits and it will be much more work, much more sanding, and possibly more layers, maybe even glitter if you damage it enough. So to avoid that, just try to flatten the glitter at the bottom as much as you can. The top and the bottom of these tumblers are always the most vulnerable, so you have to be patient, especially with the rounded bottoms. So now for the fun part, we are going to be doing a peekaboo tumbler like I said before. And I went ahead and cut this out with my Cricut, and I did an offset. If you guys want a video on how I do an offset, leave it in the comments below and I will make a video on that, on how I do them. But I used removable vinyl because I don't like to use stencil vinyl. I feel like it's way too hard to use and it's kind of difficult to maneuver. So I just go in with removable vinyl instead, and it's so much easier to peel off. So I cut this out, and now I'm just going to use my cup cradle to add it. And I wanted to add this boo to half the gold, half the glow in the dark. But I ended up just adding it to the gold because for the offset, I ended up doing the offset in a glow in the dark vinyl. So I just did this to the gold part instead. And for this, you want to make sure you squeegee it down really, really well, because if you don't, you can get paint underneath it and then it will just be much harder to like take off and work with. So just squeegee it on really, really well. So now we're going to be adding the ghost. And I found this design in Cricut Design Space, and the cool thing about this is you don't actually have to do an offset. You could just use the inner part of the ghost, and then you can keep like the eyes, the mouth, and the outline for a different project, because this is a peekaboo, so these ghosts are going to be coming off. And I wanted to mimic them like if they were flying up on the glow in the dark area. So I just added them like a scattered flying up motion. And I kept the outline and the eyes because I probably will use this for a different project. So I wanted the ghost to glow in the dark. That's why I just added the inner part instead of adding the outline. This is definitely one of those trust the process tumblers, because at first I couldn't figure out how to get the ghost to glow in the dark, but then once I got that down, everything else just kind of clicked in my head. It's kind of hard to get something that you have from like, you know, your head, or like you created in your head, to physical form. At least for me it is. But once I got that down, I pretty much just went for it. There's this old saying that my boss used to always tell me, and it's do as I say, not as I do. And in a minute or less than a minute, you will see why. I took this outside to spray paint it black because I wanted it to be black, but I didn't wait for my paint to fully dry. Since this is a 30 ounce, it took more layers than normal, and I'm very impatient when it comes down to doing any sort of project. I mean, even in general in life, I'm impatient. And as you can tell, you can see my fingerprints all over this cup. The layers of the paint were not dry enough, and when I went to touch it, it left the oils of my hands all over the cup. So, like I said, do as I say, not as I do, and make sure you let this dry for a good 20 to 30 minutes. But yeah, if you don't do that, you're gonna get smudges all over it. So to remove the removable vinyl, I like to use this needle point tool. If you go with anything bigger, you have more likely of a chance to damage the cup or hurt yourself. So when you're doing this, you have to be very gentle to not scuff up the cup, not remove the paint, and not hurt yourself. I just sped through this process because it did take me maybe like a good 10 minutes to remove. Like I said, you just want to be very patient and gentle with this step. We're going to be adding our layer of epoxy, and I did 20 mLs of both part A and B, and I did add an epoxy additive to the mix, and it's called Twilight from Lily Rose Craft Room, and it just gives it like the perfect sparkle shimmer. This epoxy additive is my favorite. I go through it so quickly because I like to add it to almost every single thing I create. It's so pretty. It's hard to see because I feel like the camera does no justice to it, but the glow on it, not the glow, but like the sparkle on it is so pretty. Since I am making this cup for myself, the smudgy fingers really don't bother me, but to avoid that, like I said, in between each spray paint layer, make sure it fully dries and you leave it to dry for a good 20 to 30 minutes outside or wherever your spray paint area is, just to avoid the smudgy fingers. Like every other layer, you want to do all around the cup. Make sure that the layer is evenly distributed, and then you want to go in with your heat torch to pop any micro bubbles. For this layer, I did a medium to thick coat because I still could feel some of the pokey bits on the bottom of the cup, and I didn't want to sand because I had already spray painted it. So I just did a medium to thick coat. Let that spin for about 6 to 8 hours, and then I started moving on to my decals. So for the boot part, like I said, I wanted it to glow in the dark. I was originally going to do it like a bronze gold color, but I was like, no, I want this to glow in the dark. So I went with glow in the dark vinyl, and it is very hard to line this up. The best thing I could tell you is possibly cut out each letter if you can individually and just place them, because to get it on one try, it is very hard. I actually had to go back and do this twice, and for the inner parts of like the letters, like the actual, like, I think these are eyes, I think they're supposed to be eyes, I took them off and I had cut out another like another piece, and I just added them because they weren't really like fitting well. So the best thing I could tell you when you're doing an offset is add each letter or design one by one. For the little ghost, I cut it in opal vinyl, and I just added the outline. I was going to add the mouth and the eyes, but I wanted to just stick to the outline because I wanted the ghost to just glow by itself instead of covering up the eyes and the mouth with opal vinyl. So I added this as close to the outline of the black spray paint as I can. These are a little bit hard to do. I mean, any offset is hard to do, but trust the process and just be very patient with it. When you're working with opal vinyl, make sure to squeegee it down really well, because if you add a layer of epoxy, for some reason the corners of the opal vinyl tend to curl up, and once the epoxy cures on that, it's kind of hard to like get them to go back down. So just make sure you squeegee out the opal vinyl very well. For this layer of epoxy, I did another 20 mLs of both part A and B, and I did add epoxy twilight to this mix as well. I was originally going to add pumpkins to the empty spaces of this cup, but I didn't like how that looked. I felt like the orange of the pumpkin was kind of throwing the whole cup off. So after this layer, I actually added like little small bats with like gold foil vinyl, and I did add a little bit of white stars, and I also did add just like a few more ghosts in that same opal vinyl as the other ones. And then after that, I did another layer of epoxy and the cup was done. This tumbler did have a screw top lid, and I did that off camera, and I just added glow-in-the-dark rhinestones to the entire lid. And for the sides of it, I added a strip of that same Boo glow-in-the-dark vinyl. After you're done adding your coat evenly, you want to take your heat torch and pop any micro bubbles around the cup. Make sure not to apply too much heat to it, or you can burn the epoxy, and you could also make the epoxy a little bit more runny. You want to let that spin for 6 to 8 hours depending on the epoxy and the temperature in your work area. I like to let mine spin overnight. After that layer was done, that's when I added the rest of my decals, and then I went in with another layer, and the cup was pretty much done after that. So that is it for today's video. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and if you liked it, please give it a thumbs up. If you aren't subscribed to my channel, go ahead and do. Also hit that notification bell so you're notified whenever we do upload a new video. Thank you guys.